Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Christa Carmen.
And this is
Murder Coaster.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are thrilled to have Edgar Award Winning author and weird history expert, J.W. Oker, on the show to discuss his newest book, Cult Following, the extreme sects that capture our imaginations and take over our lives. An insightful yet quirky and oftentimes amusing look at 30 different cults, from heavy hitters like the Manson Family, Jones and Aum Shinrikyo, to lesser-known groups you may have never heard of, like the Divine Order of the Royal Arms of the Great 11 and the John Frum Cargo Cult. Welcome, JW. Welcome to the show. So good to have you.
Oh, thank you for the invite. I really appreciate it. It's going to be fun.
Yes. We're delighted to have you, and I just want to echo everything Matt said about the book and insightful, quirky, amusing. It's you have, I mean, as anyone who's read any of your other books should very well know, you have a very keen eye for kind of looking at things a little differently and pulling out different details of stories that we've even all heard a bunch about, like the Manson family. So yeah, we're very excited to chat with you.
Yeah, let's do it. I appreciate that.
I guess I'll just ask you how. I mean, obviously you do it for the book in a way, but and you have them in different categories. But how, for our listeners, how do you define a cult, and what makes one group a cult and another not?
I love this question because I had to figure that out for myself over the course of the book, right? There's all kinds of like different definitions, and different academics have different takes on it. And nobody is very concrete. It's like a really hard thing to nail down, which is probably the most interesting thing about it. But for me, where I finally landed by the end of the book, where I finally landed was a cult is an unsuccessful religion. That's straightforward, right? So, usually us, I assume you guys aren't in cults, but usually the people who aren't in cults, we learn about a cult when tragedy happens, right? At the very end of their story, it's usually when we kind of, the mainstream comes on board and is like, oh, they existed. And that's usually how a cult dies. There's a tragedy, there is a crime, there is something salacious, and it just goes down. Religions have been around long enough that they can survive that kinds of stuff, right? So they're too big to fail. The religions are too big to fail, the mainstream ones, right? So Catholicism, right, has had a lot of controversies over this millennia, and they've been fine, right? They're able to like kind of isolate the corruption or the rot or whatever it is, push it away and say, that's not us, that was just a piece that needs to get dealt with. And cults are usually too small, too young, and too based around their leader to be able to do that. So so that's kind of how I do it then. So like, it's hard to say you're a cult if they haven't failed or succeeded yet, right? If they're just a group with some interesting ideology, some interesting dogma, they're just a group at that point. If they fail, they're a cult. If they go on to grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger, they become a religion. And my favorite example of that probably is Scientology, right? So I write nonfiction, write a lot of nonfiction, which means in that world, every single sentence is the opportunity for libel. For me to say something wrong about somebody else, right? So usually when I write a book, the lawyers come in at the end and they start like pegging through it and be like, okay, you definitely talked to this person. This quote's okay. They definitely said this. You have all the, so they make sure I'm not like, again, my books aren't like exposés, but they still have to be honest. In this case, with Cult Following, the lawyers came at the beginning. And they're like, you got to be careful who you apply the word cult to. It's either A, we can get sued, or B, all this kinds of stuff can happen. And Scientology is a group that didn't make it in the book because of that, right? I was going to put them in the book, especially because I went to school in Clearwater, so I have like a lot of like experience with Scientologists. So I wanted to put them in the book, but then the lawyer said, no, that's dangerous. And then by the end of the book, I was glad I didn't, because they've actually weathered a lot of controversies and stayed around. So if they keep doing that, they're going to be a religion, a big religion at some point. Even Catholicism, they all started out as a small group of people believing something different from the rest, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I define it. It's just a cult is an unsuccessful religion, usually spectacularly unsuccessful.
Right. That's so interesting that you framed it that way. And it's funny because it's like, everything that you're saying makes perfect sense. But it's just, I don't know that I ever really kind of thought about it in that way. Like, I wish I had written this down. I didn't know the conversation was going to go in this direction right off the rip. And I think it's like the second one that you cover. Who's the group where like they believe that the kind of like America and like the bringing of the cargo.
Oh,
John Frum.
John Frum
Thank you,
Cult,
thank
yeah.
you, thank you. You have a little, it's just like a couple paragraphs at the end of talking about that one where you kind of talk about like, you know, we think that something like that is so crazy, but yet when you look at like the fact that their, you know, Messiah came when they did versus Catholicism waiting as long as they have, and you know, the Amazon and the cargo, like these things being actually delivered. It's so funny when you just think about semantics and like what makes something successful versus not. It's really just all a matter of perspective.
Yeah.
Well, what about the Hare Krishnas? Would you consider the Hare Krishnas a cult? They're extremely successful.
They are. So they probably are more like a sect. And again, this is where it gets really confusing, right? Because sects, SECTs, are offshoots of larger religions oftentimes that either become their own religion or just always maintain a sect, right? If you try to figure out all the Protestant religions, right, you're like, oh man, some of them are very small and weird. It's almost impossible. So I think at that point, I've never heard them or come across the Hare Krishnas as a cult. But again, they could be one. But here's where I get hit, and this is where it gets touchy, right? Because once you start digging into these things academically and objectively, it gets really uncomfortable, especially if you're a believer in something, right? I always joke I'm not a believer in anything, like from like ghosts to true love, like none of it exists, right? Or free will, or whatever. So it's easier for me, but like I had one group, like some Christian group, review the book, Cult Following, some Christian institute, and they took umbrage at my definition of cults because they're in their mind, a cult is any group that doesn't follow the Bible. That's kind of, and generally it's how religious people define cults. If they believe something that's not what we believe, they're a cult, right? So their definition is a lot more black and white in that if the cult
Charlie Manson was into the Bible. He loved the Bible. He quote the Bible. Jim Jones. Oh my God,
he did.
There's so many.
Yeah, no, Jim Jones was probably the most Christian.
Yeah.
David
Koresh. He had the Bible literally memorized.
Yeah.
He could tell it to you right from, you know.
But you gotta realize, even Bible-based religions, they are very territorial and they're very judgmental. I grew up hyper religious. I grew up indie fundy, and we were so our truth is the only truth. Like we wouldn't even hang out with other independent Baptists. That's how kind of insular we were. And if you were Catholic, even though again Catholic's one of the most successful religions on the planet, to independent fundamentalists, Catholics were a cult, even though they were gigantic, right? So generally, for I think a religious person, then again, I'm speaking for a group that I'm not a member of, unfortunately, but any group that preaches a gospel opposite for sure, but even different, is a cult in their definitions. So it's why it gets touchy. If I share that with somebody who's really, really a believer, and I say, once upon a time, your religion was probably a cult. It becomes not fun. so I just changed back to whatever is fun.
I really like the way you show the history of the word and the etymology of it, and how it wasn't a bad term originally. How it slowly became that. And I also like your definitions at the very end. You gave some good ones, like an infallible leader that no one can question, being separated from friends and family.
Yeah, over time it became I'm not technically an academic. Technically, I'm not at all an academic. But over time, as I was so I had to get to those 30 cults. I went through a lot of cults. I think I started originally with 100, and then I got it down to 60, and I was going to do the book about 60 cults. But what I started to learn was, besides my publisher pushing back on cost of publishing the book, was the cults are pretty repetitive. Religious groups kind of believe the same thing over and over again. And the most bizarre thought in my head as I was doing this was, you've seen one UFO cult, you've seen them all. And to me, that shouldn't be. UFO should be infinite diversity, infinite combinations, or whatever Star Trek and stuff is. But no, they're so repetitive that I was able to get down to, I think in those 30 cults I chose, you can see all the seeds of cultum across time. And then what you're mentioning is the 7 points at the end of the red flags of a cult, or how to recognize a cult. They just, almost every single one of them exhibited that in very blatant fashion. So I didn't even need to be kind of dedicate my life to learning about cults to kind of see the pattern, relatively quickly as that over the course of doing this book. And I think it still stands the test, because again, I hear about new cults all the time. Like I'm not a cult expert. Like if I do a book about cursed objects, I can pretty much keep up. But cults, are so many of them that every time I do a talk, somebody will bring up some cult that I have never heard of, even after years of researching, never heard of, right? Because there's just so many of them. And but still, they all kind of, even those new cults, when I learn about them and I apply that framework I have at the end of the book, they still kind of match up pretty one-to-one.
What do you think is the minimum amount of people that you need to be in a cult? Could 3 people be a cult? 2?
No. 3 people was like a suicide pact, probably. Let's see. That's good. That's a good question. There's definitely it has to be a group. It has to be enough people. So take it this way, right? If it's, I've never thought about this before, so it's a new question for me. So just so you know, this is off the top of my head and rambling. Like a certain number of people could just be a family, right? You can, and families have all kinds of like problems and dysfunctions and weirdness and stuff within just the family, but they're not a cult, they're a family. If you go one level out of that, I guess you just need a leader and a congregation. If your congregation is 5, if your congregation is 15, you can have a cult, yeah. But you do need to be growing. That's probably like a second definition of that is, it can be any size, but it can't be stagnant, or you have like one bad car accident and the entire cult's gone, right? So I think that would be my answer that I've never given before.
Love it. And yeah, I totally had a question about like what cults ended up on the cutting room floor, but it's, I guess, not that your answer wasn't great, but I guess I'm like kind of a little disappointed, because I was thinking like you were going to have all these stories of like, oh, I had to cut this one and it was so interesting, but but it sounds like once you get past that initial 30, you start to kind of just see, same old, how creative can you be with
like, this is my point. This is my most famous point in the entire book is, if you are starting a new religion, which is basically what a cult is, right? In fact, some academics call them emerging religions. It's their definitions, ERs. If you are starting a cult today, 2025, you better have some kind of ideology I've never heard of, right? You should, if you have a direct line to a deity or a direct line to an extraterrestrial intelligence, your dogma should be surprising. It shouldn't just be like, hey, protect the planet, keep your body clean, don't hurt other people. I'd be like, what is the purpose of your cult? Like, that's been being taught by every single religion since early days. So why even start a cult if you don't have a brand new dogma? But brand new dogmas are almost impossible to come up with. It takes like a level of imagination and out of the box thinking and sideways thinking that like it just doesn't happen. But that's why I think that's again, another red flag is, oh, this cult again. We've heard this cult again. We've heard this, sexual trafficking cult. We've heard dieting cults. We've heard all these cults. So like it is kind of disappointing, like you said, to the point that we were trying to apply the cult label to just some random groups just to kind of like play around with it. But again, lawyers stop that. But it is really repetitive. But again, if you do that same exercise with major religions, they're not very far off from each other, really. There's obviously some specific differences, but in general, they're all pretty much Bill and Ted, right? Be excellent, party on, and be excellent to each other. That's kind of what every single ideology like kind of boils down to. Or go to hell. that's
why they work, is because they're based on fundamental truths that everyone can agree with.
Yes,
so you look at the basic tenets and you're like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I want to join. I want to be part of this group and stuff. But then you find out that the leader is like some power magnamaniacal madman or madwoman who's,
Yeah, no, you're dead right. That's why I think joining a cult is one of the most human things you can do. Like,
yeah, you're saying that.
A group of like-minded people who believe they have the truth about life, but underneath an impressive leader. That's how we do corporations, politics, families, friendship groups. That's just how we work. So like, my biggest push in talks is like, joining a cult doesn't make you gullible or alien or weird. It literally makes you human. That's what it does. It's a proof of your humanity. So even though cults can believe weird things, and again, religions believe weird things, we're just used to those things, it doesn't mean that person, we shouldn't other those people that join cults, because they are just exercising, exactly what you said, the fundamental desires of our existence, the fundamental basic truths of what we need, want, and desire in life. So yeah, I totally agree with that, because it's just, learning through these cults, it's fun, it's weird, it's bizarre, it's ripe for jokes, but it's also very humanizing and like empathy inspiring as well to like go through these stories.
That makes me have to ask you, out of all of these cults, were there any of them where you were like, I could see myself joining that cult?
Sure. Basically, any hippie cult. For some reason, I like the hippies. I think it's because they tried something, right? So their counterculture is kind of what they call themselves. They rejected, whatever, capitalism and all these things. They built their entire existence around culture, right? Music and clothes and like all these kind of really cool things. It didn't work, right? They couldn't find the thing to replace the thing they rejected.
Hey, man, I'm in Northern California. I'm going to have to disagree that it didn't work. I'm living it, man. No. I was also a member of a hippie cult, the Grateful Dead family, which is like a collection of cults.
And there are benign cults. There are.
You know about the Spinners? You ever hear of them?
The what now?
The Spinners.
I don't think so.
They were part of the Grateful Dead family, and you know about whirling dervishes, right?
Yes.
They considered themselves a continuation of the whirling dervishes.
Oh.
And they would spin and spin. That's what spin, and they were able to, through the guitar of Jerry Garcia, reach higher levels of consciousness in a godlike state. And then you know what happened, of course, right? The leader said everyone should be abstinent, and he was fucking them all. And it was the classic situation. And then they ended up, and he ended up like trying to steal the money because they would sell all this beautiful, incredibly beautiful handmade clothing. I've even got a hoodie from like back in like 1993. I still have it that they made. But and these beautiful dresses that would come out so when you spin, the dress would like flare out, very distinctive look and style.
That all appeals to me. But again, it did end up a little bit of a, what is it? A deadhead sticker on a Cadillac. A lot of that went that way, right? But those always, but again,
they're in Vegas right
golden
now.
Era of cults. That was the golden era of cults. The 70s, the counterculture decades was the golden era of cults because everybody was trying to look for the thing to replace the thing they were rejecting, right? That's why everybody started going to India and looking at their cultures and their ideas to see if that was, if that was valid or that was useful or whatever. So, those are the ones that really appeal to me. Is just people, I don't know, digging the basic cool stuff of life, right? Music and each other. And, fashion and just kind of like, rejecting the ugly stuff. That's the big one. Rejecting the ugly stuff is what I like a lot about the hippies.
The return to nature.
Yeah. Yep. Nature. Yep. Exactly. I will say, though, the only ones, the ones. So I said if a cult's going to impress me at all, they need to come up with a new dogma. I only came across new dogmas that surprised me twice. That was like, oh, my gosh, I never thought of that before. One was the Koreshans, the Koreshan Unity, not David Koresh in Waco, but the Koreshan Unity down in Estero, Florida. They were a Hollow Earth cult. They're also one of these cults that are pretty benign. There's no abuse. They're really progressive. Like their leading board was 7 women. This is in the 19th century. With 7 women. They installed electricity before anybody else. And like Edison came down to see their implementation. They had a school. They had a theater. They were a pretty cool group.
And the school was the one where the school was open to everybody. I thought that was super. Yeah, they're like, hey, super interesting.
Not in a brainwashing ideological way. Just like, hey, if you don't have a school to go to and you need math, the 3 R's, just come on over. We don't care. Like they were like a benign group, but like their idea of the Hollow Earth wasn't like below our feet is a Hollow Earth. That's pretty much been done a million times. It was the 3 of us are in a Hollow Earth right now. Like China is 8,000 miles like above our heads right now. All the sun, the moon, all those like spatial phenomenon are optical illusions, and they spent their entire life as a cult. They don't exist anymore, although their commune's still around. You can go visit it. It's a park. Trying to measure the Earth, like they were just trying to prove that it was concave, right? That it was just slightly concave, and that to me that was like, man, if that's true, that's mind blowing, right? If the aliens come and say you're ruining the planet, get off it. That's not mind blowing. I've heard that forever. But hey, you're in the middle of a hollow sphere, mind blowing. And the other one was breatharianism, where you don't need food to exist. Food is an alien substance for the body is so well designed, evolved, formed that all it needs is clean air and it can operate, right? And I was like, man, if that's true, that changes everything, right? That's what I want from a cult. If that's true, that changes everything. That's what I want from anything, religion, cults. And of course, it's not true, but like if it was, Suddenly I'm a rich man because I don't have a giant grocery bill, and suddenly I don't have anxieties over my weight going up and down, and I don't. All these things just leave.
I knew people in the 90s who
two.
tried to be breatharians.
Who did?
Just folks I know back in the 90s.
I met a guy at a book signing where he came up to me and was like, "Hey, I tried that breatharian stuff," but his motivation was completely economical. He just was like, wasn't making a lot of scratch and just wanted to figure out a way to cut things out of his budget, and found some YouTube videos. There's some like institutes today that still exist, and was like, man, if I could cut food out of my life, I'm doing okay. So yeah, no, it's pop. It's not like not one of those cults. It's like a giant organization that happened one time and then left. It just pops up here and there in a bunch of groups around a book or around an institute, or it's connected to the idea of prana in India, which is the idea of gathering energy from the air. So these things, they just pop up as these small groups that believe it. But I again, if true, that changes everything. That's that's exactly.
What about Kundalini yoga? That was crazy.
Yeah. So all that
I used
stuff,
to study Kundalini yoga. I thought it was and then I saw that new documentary. Did you see that?
I haven't seen it. I heard about it.
It's all made up. It's all complete, utter hogwash. I was like, I cannot believe that I used to believe all this stuff. But if it works, it works. You know what I mean? So you kind of can't completely discredit it.
That's the problem with belief.
They just made this shit up. He's just making, and he was saying it was like an ancient tradition from India for thousands of years. utter bullshit. The guy just made this shit up, man.
That's one of my problems with belief, is that even if it's not true, it can have value, right? Even if there is no heaven, hell, God, whatever in the Christian world, like believing it can still give you a community and give you a reason to exist and
make people be good.
Make people be good, exactly, right?
Don't murder each other. Don't lie,
Right, just follow the 10 Commandments. You're probably doing okay if you do that.
Yeah.
Right? So it's that kind of like placebo kind of like thing about belief that always like, at the end of the day, I can't argue too long because I'm just like, oh wait, you're doing fine. Just if that's working.
It's almost like we need it as a species to survive.
I totally believe that. Yeah, I think and I always make this joke that nature kind of made a mistake by making us conscious, because it's self-conscious, because that like blows up everything about nature. So it ameliorated that by also giving us the ability to believe anything, right? The elasticity of belief. So that kind of fixed that self-consciousness that like really, made us different from the rest of the world of nature.
It's kind of like the universe trying to understand itself. It's bizarre being conscious and all these different things that you can believe, and it's just strange.
Yeah. No, there's a reason why I like deer and squirrels don't have religions. They just do what they need to do.
I think the craziest one of all of them is the Aum Shinrikyo. Those guys were so big. They had so much money. They took on the Yakuza, and they were all high as hell on acid. Like the whole time, they bought like a helicopter from Russia, and they're like high on acid trying to fly it. They were trying to start World War III. And if that subway gassing had been successful, there is a chance that they could have actually sparked it. They were almost close to making it real.
They're interesting. Japan in general, especially post the bomb drops, was very susceptible to cults, to new ideas, right? It kind of like that, again, it was awful tragedy, but it knocked them back and it was like, what are we doing? What do we believe? Like, where do we... And of course, they're like intense, like kind of success culture also does as well. But yeah, they're interesting because a lot of cults believe in end times, right? World War III, destruction by UFOs, Christ coming and fighting Satan. And those are important religions because, especially cults, because you're trying to recruit, right? And you need a sense of urgency. It's kind of like politics, right? Every time there's an election cycle, it's education is falling apart, planet's falling apart. Everything's awful. Everything's code red. But if you elect me, I'll fix it all in 4 years or less, right? So
politics is a cult.
Idea. Yeah, exactly. So that kind of idea with the cult, like, hey, the world's going to end, but if you join us, you'll be okay. That cult, though, was one of the only ones I could find that actually tried to bring it about when it didn't happen on its own. They're like, okay, this doesn't seem to be happening. This third nuclear war that's going to happen. Of course, that was a very, and again, in Japan, that was a very likely scenario. They'd been bombed. Another nuclear war was like, yeah, we've already been through this once. It could happen again. The rest of us, the rest of us were a little bit more cottoned and complacent, but they were like there. So when it didn't happen, though, when there was no more like nukes being thrown at Japan, they decided to like, again, invest in chemistry to learn how to like do bioterrorism agents and gas people. And fortunately, like if you dig into their processes, they weren't great at it. They were okay enough that they hurt some people and killed some people for sure. But
if they had done it correctly, oh my God.
Yeah, it'd have been catastrophic levels of
Catastrophic.
murder, for sure.
Totally.
Yep. Even today, I was talking to somebody the other day who had just gone to that city in Japan, and they stopped putting public trash cans around, all because of that sarin gas incident. They didn't want anywhere you could hide a package, basically. So they got rid of, because that's how they kind of planted in the subway. They put packages around. They don't want people to be able to hide packages in public trash cans because, again, it's not paranoia when it happened, right? So this happened, it can happen again. So that's kind of, again, that is a very fascinating cult in general. Again, like you said, they amassed a ton of money, made an empire, and then just kind of like went at war with the general populace.
I mean, their leader's just like this blind old weird guy. They're like drinking tea with his hair and shit.
No, and he started out in like holistic medicine. He was just like kind of one of those people, and somehow he became revered to the point, like you said, people wanted to drink his bathwater.
He would get in the lotus position with his legs crossed and flap his legs. And when he did, it would jerk him up into the air. So he'd literally fly in the air. And they take pictures of him doing this and then be like, he can levitate. He's levitating. He was just jumping is all he was doing.
Yeah, and people believed.
People believed it like crazy. That was like a huge one. Like, he can levitate. There's photographs of it.
And again, that's one of those things where from the outside, you're like, you believed a levitation like photo. But we believe everything. Like, again, every single paranormal photo of a ghost, every single photo, like these days, of course, it's hard. It's getting even harder to believe.
I was just going to say, like, not to interrupt you, but it's crazy. I saw an image the other day of like an eagle supposedly making off with a wolf's head. And it was the worst Photoshop I've ever seen in my life. And I went to the comments because I was like, this is going to be great. This is going to be hilarious. All these people are going to be. I was scrolling and there was like, nobody was like thinking it was a false image. And I was like, what is happening?
I think our instinct, and I'm not positive about this, but I think our instinct is always to believe, like automatically we want to believe. And then it takes like discipline or experience or being burned before to like that other instinct of like cynicism and like not believing everything to kick in. That one's not learned. Like that one's learned. That one's not instinctual. It's like kids. If I tell my kids anything, they're gonna believe me. If I tell them the weirdest things, they're like, really? And that's kind of humanity in a nutshell. Really? We want that. We want that. We want to be surprised and
magic,
and shocked. Yeah, exactly. So yeah,
Santa Claus, the cult of Santa Claus.
That's right, for sure. It's a lot of rituals. I'm out of the phase where I have to like put out cookies and stuff.
We just ended that one. That was
it was getting elaborate. It was like cookies, and then also the reindeer needed carrots and like stuff that I never did as a kid. Like, did
they do the elf on the shelf? Because my husband and I put like a quick kibosh on that. We were like, "There's no elf on the shelf. I'm not waking. I have a hard enough time getting out of my house in the morning, like feeding the chickens, feeding the child, feeding the dog. I gotta put an elf somewhere new every morning. It ain't happening."
That's sometimes how you leave a religion. You're like, this is too much. I gotta get out of it.
Yeah. It's funny too. I mean, I want to get back to the book. We're getting like a little more side tangent, but like I was thinking too with like the bigger kind of definition that you have, and it kind of doesn't really fall under the like unsuccessful religion thing, but some of what we see online now is almost like these kind of, but again, it's like anti-political, these kind of movements for like homesteading and like living off the grid. And you get people that just start, and again, you can just go to the comment section and see really quickly, like the sort of thinking that makes people just kind of jump on a bandwagon and, you know, be off to the races. That was a lot of mixed metaphors, but
no, this is my biggest surprise about our ability to form cults, right? You'd think the internet would have ended all cults, right? Mm-hmm. Because A, we'd have access to information within taps, and B, you're not being secluded geographically. If you have access to the internet, you are getting access to other ideas, which is kind of what
and not being isolated socially, so you don't have to look for meaning and look for connection.
They say the internet destroyed Scientology.
That's right.
No, it did. Like, it's seriously, and the Scientologists are telling their followers, "Don't go on the internet." Because, I mean, it's just full of anti-Scientology shit.
Yeah, but here we are, like, we are, 35 years into the internet, and the exact opposite is happening. It's actually helping, like you were saying, Christa, it's actually helping groups form more and be more isolated. Somehow the fishbowls of the internet are more watertight than regular fishbowls. And I don't understand it yet, because, again, if I see the eagle carrying the wolf, I immediately start Googling. I'm like, wait, is this real? Even if
same.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's a researcher in me or what, but like that's my instinct. But for some reason, people get trapped in only a few websites of the 7 billion that are on the internet. Right. So I don't understand that phenomenon, but for some reason the internet is making cults more prolific and not less prolific.
Yeah,
Flat
it's almost like
earthers.
it's tapping into. Say it again, Matt. Sorry.
Flat earthers.
There you go.
People who believe the Earth is flat. It's huge on the internet. Huge. They have. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And they'd only be able to find each other because of the internet, but they also should be able to disprove themselves because of the internet. But it just doesn't happen that way.
No. They do their own research.
yeah. But I don't. And maybe I'm again. But every time I say a statement about cults, I always try to like reflect it back in myself, right? So I'm like, when I say that, make that point about the internet, I'm always like, wait, am I also trapped in 7 websites as well? Like, am I also not actually like I'm constantly trying to test my own beliefs and my own like. Fortunately, being a cynic, it's a lot easier. But like, how much do I not actually? How small is my world? Even though I have access to the internet, how small is my world? And the truth is, it's probably pretty small.
Yeah, it's God, that's a whole nother rabbit hole to fall down. But yeah, I don't know. It's funny. It's I wonder, like, it makes me think, everybody wants to believe the best about themselves. There's all those like, they all have names. I've been out of psych classes for way too long to remember all the terms of like the biases but it's like, you always think that you're smarter than everyone, we always believe that we wouldn't fall for, but yeah, I mean, maybe it's just like everybody has their weakness and you just don't know what it is until you fall headfirst into it. And it's like, yeah, I'm never going to fall for the like eagle carrying the wolf's head on the internet, but like, what am I going to fall for?
NXIVM.
I don't know.
But then you get into a group like NXIVM where it's like all self-help and like it seems legit and there's CEO businessmen are a part of it. And you're like, this isn't a cult. It's a whatever it is. I don't know. Next thing you know, you're getting branded and fucking having sex with this strange little volleyball player.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing I like about that. So one of the things I learned as a result of this project is the question isn't when you hear somebody joining a cult or when you kind of throw it back at yourself, am I gullible enough to believe a cult? That's like almost, it becomes a straw man argument. That's actually not the question. The question is actually at my most vulnerable point, whether that's vulnerability is existentially, socially, financially, health-wise, will I accept help? And if your answer to that is yes, then you can join a cult. And the answer should be yes for everybody on the planet, right? If you need help, will you say yeah will you accept help? Then that's all a cult is. And again, it's not always people at their most dire circumstances. I don't want to like paint all cult members the same, but it is somebody, like you said, Christa, somebody with some void or looking for something, and it's provided. And again, these cults aren't just ideologies. They are friend groups, and they are a way to, again, touch grass sometimes, right? Get out of the rat race and go grow freaking tomatoes. That's a massive benefit. Like, why would you not do that, right?
Yeah.
So they're not always, they rarely know what's happening at the top as well, right? All the crimes are going on, but cults are not, they're not foreign. They are us. They are exactly us. It's just and I'm trying to be careful not to stretch it too far to like include all groups, like not groups that are just fanatics of a movie franchise or like people who like a certain sport. But it's all the same.
They label themselves a cult. Cult. You say it in the book.
Cult classic.
Movies,
if you're a fan of them, yeah.
Cult following is the name of the book.
Which is weird because to me, like when I grew up, like the cult movies they were cult because nobody cared about them, right? That's why they were cult. And that's changed to, again, Star Wars was never a cult movie, right? Evil Dead was, Star Wars wasn't. But Star Wars is now more of a cult movie because it's got fanatic fans, right? That live it, dress it, collect it, watch all the different variations of it. It's got massive amounts of media. It's got a Bible's worth of stories now.
But you said Bible. Maybe it's transcended and it's a religion. I feel like it's successful enough to the point.
Yeah, there you go. Now it's not a cult; it's a religion. Right? Absolutely.
Wild.
Which is great. Again, most cults aren't, not most, but like cults don't have to have a religious component to them, right? They can be around a piece of culture. They can be around an idea, around a love of feet. There's like a foot worshiping cult in the book, right?
Right.
So those things could. You're right. If they. Yeah, and then they're definitely massively successful. You're right about that. That's very interesting. That used to me down ways I haven't thought about before.
A lot of filmmakers almost create their own cults, like Stanley Kubrick. I would say the followers of him, and definitely like David Lynch. And some of his earlier films are obviously cult classics, like Eraserhead.
And that's a very good point. But he has the people that he sort of collects, it's because he has such an interesting way of looking at things. It's almost like a different thought process. Like, like we talked about for the very beginning of the call, the cult branches off because they're kind of like rebelling against something. They're pushing against some norm or some accepted. And you're trying
to find those friends, right? Back in pre-internet, right? You're trying to find a copy of whatever, I Spit on Your Grave, or some of those like really rare things you hear about. You had to either know a friend or find that one video store that had it and whatever 3 towns over. But like back then, that's why it was a cult, because there were so few of you and you all were alike but hadn't found each other yet, right? Whereas again, today, they use it the opposite way. If you have a massive following as a IP or as a director or as a whatever musician, then it's a cult. But you're right. I need to play with that some more because that's very interesting.
It was a hunt back in the day before the internet. Punk rock, movies. Yeah. Like, I remember trying to find Eraserheads forever. You could not find it. You couldn't see it.
I remember a certain movie series I watched backwards because I couldn't find the first one first. I think I used Evil Dead already, but I watched Army of Darkness first, and Evil Dead 2, and the first Evil Dead. But my daughter, who's like 15, she discovers, Evil Dead yesterday, and suddenly she has access to every single movie, the series, the Wikipedias, the very obscure information, the DVD tracks, and she can find those on YouTube. Like, she can become an expert in something in one day that took me 20 years to learn all about. So it's really wild.
And then there's like a whole nother conversation around that where like, which is the better, like, there are pros and cons. Is it great to have all of that experience and knowledge right at the tip of your fingers?
It is. I'm going to say yes.
But is it like, is there something?
It's not as fun. It's not as like challenging.
Yeah.
But I mean, my son, he's
so
like,
readily accessible.
He's a film fanatic, music fanatic, and it's just amazing to talk to him because, like you said, in a day, 48 hours maybe, he's suddenly an expert. He's like, you know what I mean? He's suddenly like, one day, I remember years ago, he came up to me and he was like, I just listened to every single Pink Floyd album in order twice.
Yes.
And you're like, yeah, and you're just like, well, I wish I could have done that when I was a kid, but I'd had to go pay $10 for each album. You know what I mean? Wouldn't even be able to find them.
It's super humbling. It's humbling. It's like, oh man, I dedicated my life to this, and you just slapped me in a week.
Yeah, and he's always finding
very
crazy
humbling.
filmmakers, Russians, and crazy shit, like, and obsessing over them and falling into the little weird cult, and then mastering it, and moving on to the next one.
Yep.
So, is your 15-year-old daughter really into the Evil Dead, or was that an example?
She loves horror in general. She's a big horror fan. Star Trek is her newest obsession, and she's gone. She just read like the actress who played Yeoman Rand's biography, right? Like that's how deep she can go. That I wouldn't. I to this day didn't know that existed, right?
Yeah.
And I grew up a Star Trek guy, so it's like it's very, very, very fascinating again to watch them deal with this flood of information that we're all probably not us older generations aren't capable of doing, right? But it could be cool. It could like. I don't know, because again, that we're getting way off topic, but I think it could be really cool for like these younger generations to have that kind of a base that fast, because maybe they can do things cooler. Like we get to a limit really fast because of our age, but they can springboard again. Once you get done all the Floyds, you're done. It's in your wheelhouse. You just keep going to the next evolution.
Well, to bridge between crazy internet availability of information and the book, obviously you said you started off with 100, you were maybe going to cover 60, you ended up with 30. How did you even, like, what was your main source of research? Was it just Googling? Like Matt and I were talking about Mary Blackburn. Neither of us had ever heard of her. Mm-hmm. How did you like Google or research? What was your like starting point? Like how you were going to compile the cults?
It was relatively easy. And I'll tell you why, just for me, because most of the topics I usually gravitate toward are not mainstream. So most of my books aren't about mainstream topics. So I have to like really dig and scrape and like find sources I don't trust. Like that whole thing kind of happens like with like, paranormal or the strange or the weird or the outre. With cults, they're all the sources are mainstream, right? So I'm like, it's almost too, like I had to write about the Manson family, right? Which I didn't want to because I thought it'd been done well enough. But my publisher's like, nope, that's one of our rules. You need the Manson family in there.
Nice. So I agree with your publisher.
I'm like, how the hell do I put like, the book and the Time magazine articles and the day by day accounting of the trial? How do I put all that into 2,000 words and then move on to the next cult?
Right.
So it was almost it was just an overflow of information. Once you just start typing in cults and like looking at books, they're just all out there. I'm sure there's stuff I missed. I'm sure there's entire giant chunks of like valuable information about cults and certain cults that I would have loved. I just didn't come across because it was just an avalanche. But the good news about an avalanche is you're coming up with good stuff because there's just so much of it. So yeah, that's kind of what I did. I started with Googling, started looking at lists. I started trying to like, remove words from my searches, right? Because again, you're going to end up at Heaven's Gate and Koresh every single time. And just tried to, but again, though, there's a reason why those cults are there's so much written about them because they're super interesting and there's a lot of content. Whereas some of these other obscure ones, not as much, or it's all in Japanese.
The Anthill Kids. I've wanted to do an episode on them forever, and I can't get Savage Messiah. It's like $250 for the book. I'm like,
yeah, same. But I bought it.
You did, see,
for a write-off.
Nice.
But that's the only way you could learn deeply about the Anthill Kids is through Savage Messiah. At first I tried to like just find like excerpts from it and like just pages, but it was like, no, this is the source. And there's usually that way for the major cults. Anthill Kids is not major. It's probably the most interesting cult in there to me. It's the most terrifying cult to me. It's the one I did. So when I pitched this idea to my publisher, they're like, you're the jokey Bigfoot guy. How are you going to write about like abuse and destruction and still be jokey Bigfoot guy? I'm like, oh, I can do both. I'll show you. So I tried to find the worst cult I could find, and it was the Anthill Kids. And, I had to prove to them by writing that essay first and say, look, this is how it's going to sound. This is kind of my voice. This is how it's going to sound. This is how I'm going to deal with the actual victims, how I'm going to deal with Roche, all these things. Roche.
Rock.
But again, that one was, yes. So that one was, that was the hardest one. Obviously, Manson and Jonestown are all hard, but we've heard them so often that there's a little bit of a crust.
No real genital mutilation.
No. But also
there was genital mutilation in the Haley Bob fucking Heaven's Gate. They did it.
Yes, because because Applewhite had some problems, had some like dysmorphia problems, and kind of pushed that on his followers. Right, so they started treating their bodies like they were just shells, like they weren't real. They were just vehicles for them to like get out of at some point, right? So yeah. So that's but again, like Heaven's Gate. But even before I was a writer, I knew about Heaven's Gate, right? I was alive when they announced it. And I was googling on the website. And I was like on their website reading firsthand accounts when it happened.
I was in San Diego when it happened.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
That's big news.
It was a big deal.
But it was the first time it was the first time that you could get firsthand information about a cult after hearing about it, right?
On
you
the internet,
go right to their website, see videos of them explaining exactly why they're doing it. Like it was like, again, that's one of those internet like openings for me, like, oh, this is what the internet can do, right? Immediate firsthand information. But yeah. So like the Anthill Kids though are the ones that few people know about. Very few people know about. Like I'm talking to people about them. They don't bring them up.
There's a movie.
But I don't think I've seen the movie.
Yeah, there's a movie called Savage Messiah.
Oh, they made it based on the book. Okay,
but it's not. It's a good film, but they just, to really get into that grittiness, you know what I mean? It's like when they made American Psycho into a movie. You're like, well, yeah, they made it into a movie, but they didn't really go too deep into.
I have trouble. That's the one I have trouble describing. Like how bad, because you have to like go into details. Like a mass suicide is a very clinical phrase. Mass suicide. Yeah. But what he did to his victims at the times,
backwoods surgery for no reason.
It's really hard. It's like, you're just saying the words like just taints you somehow.
We have a lot of fun on our podcast. We get pretty nitty gritty.
So you talked about.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, you talked about pitching to your publisher and then writing that initial essay. I'm curious if that's how you kind of went about writing the book. Did you kind of, and also too, if you could talk about how you categorized the cults, because that was different than any way that I've ever, you see sometimes in the grocery store, is a National Geographic will do like a little magazine of the cult, and they're usually set up in a much different way. So how did you categorize, and then how did you go about writing the book? Was it essays that you pieced together? Did you have the organization first, or how? Tell me.
Yeah, so So I try to find something a hook for each cult, right? Something that was interesting uniquely about them, if possible, right? So Heaven's Gate is pretty interesting because it's a mass suicide, but not the only mass suicide. But that internet component made them even more interesting to me. So I was trying to find something a little bit that each one had something unique hook in it. But as far as like we categorized it by what we believed the cult members were searching for. It's failed utterly, honestly, because they're looking for all. So it was five things like protection, betterment. I can't remember the other three off the top of my head, but it's those kinds of things that we're searching for. But really, you're searching for all five of those at once. That's what really happens. But we tried to like figure out a way, or I tried to figure out a way to like make those five topics more relevant to those cults that I chose for those sections. But for me, it was very important to come at it from a cult member's perspective. Mostly because at the time I was going through some like bad shit. So I was very much like a very soft part of my life, right? Where like everything affected me times a million. And like, so I wanted to really, and also approaching this with the humility of knowing, oh, I was hyper religious for like 25 years. And now I believe nothing that I believed back then. Realizing you could be wrong, right? So I was in this perfect spot in my life where I was just wrong about everything. So I could be, so with that mindset, it's hard to like think about the cult leader, right? That takes a level of bravado and self-delusion and egocentrism to like achieve that. I just couldn't identify with that at the time. Maybe now I can. But back then it was just like, oh man, these people are just real people going through real stuff, trying to fix their lives or find some or better their lives. And I just really kind of vibed with that and really kind of like felt that. So we wanted to approach it from that way. Like you said, if you go on Netflix and scroll through the 1 bazillion cult documentaries in there, the salacious angle is what they go after, right? Because again, there's a big difference between why a cult leader starts a cult and why a cult member joins a cult, right? It's night and day. It's two different everythings. It's almost two different books, right? So you could write this book from just the perspective of the cult leaders. We decided to try to write it from the perspective of the members, which is a little impossible to do, right? Because usually the member stories are usually, again, pretty repetitive and pretty understandable and pretty, empathetic. And all the interest is these weird leaders and like how they get corrupted and the power abuses that happens to them. And that's usually a more interesting story. But we were kind of going under the assumption that the stories themselves are going to be interesting. So let's try to keep the humanity at the forefront at all times. That was kind of like the goal. And then there was just, again, my usual read. So this is my third book that I've done this way, where I just did a series of essays to kind of cover an entire field. So I kind of had a process for that already. So like that's kind of how the book came around, was just feeling, because again, there's one of the things I hate doing is putting a book out where it doesn't need to be put out. There's already a million books about this and like whatever. And cults got very close to that for me. I'm like, man, there's a cult book every 3 months. There's some really good ones out there that have already done a great job. I don't want to just add to the cacophony. So to try to make a book that I thought wasn't out there, I really tried to hit on, this is human. This is not weird this is weird. This is weird, but this is also human. Humans are weird, like that. And to try to go from that angle, because I hadn't seen that angle very much in writing about cults.
I've read a ton of cult books. I'm obsessed with cults. And I have to say, the human aspect, you really nailed it. You did such a good job. And it was a great read. And I didn't surprisingly know about a lot of these cults. So
well, I really appreciate that. If you know the Anthill Kids and you know those other ones, you've hit a level I haven't talked to anybody about before. So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, I want to do the Blackwood. I'd never heard of that, of her. That
was a good one for you guys. Again, that's kind of a murder story, almost more than a cult story. It's one of the most weirdest cult stories because, again, and in general, and I'll say this, and again, my apologies if I cross gender lines too much, but like in general, when the leader of a cult is a woman, the abuses are less. They're also usually more financially based. If it's a male leader of a cult, the abuses are usually much more so, more cynical, and also always sexual. Every single time it's going to be sexual abuses. So the Blackwoods were so interesting because they were just old-fashioned con artists. They were just like impossible murderers. we don't know, possible poisoners, but just classic like almost fun con artists. Like you take away whether or not they poisoned anybody or not, which we don't know. You take that element out of the story, it could be a comedy. You could actually write this story as a comedy. Two women who were like actresses and pioneers in cinema even decided to dance with angels and write a book that pointed out all the treasures in the world, found funding by a bunch of people, never finished the book. Like, they go to court. Their followers actually take them to court and say, hey, we gave you a ton of money. Now we think you were leading us astray. Give us our money back, which is actually a landmark case because the judge is like, listen, we can't adjudicate what is true or false in religion. We can't. Sorry. Like, if you believe that hogwash, and the judge basically said it was hogwash, it's hogwash. I can't believe you believed it, but you did. That's on you. You can't demand money back because you were wrong about the hogwash. And so it's such a amazing story. And then if you throw in the possibility of poisoning their husbands and burying a dead body below the floorboards with 7 dead dogs, and it's just like it has all of the elements of an interesting cult story without it being too icky, right? You don't feel like you take a shower afterwards. But yeah, no, those were one of the fun ones to write, honestly.
An old-time Hollywood. Venice Beach. I mean, God, you never think about Venice Beach in like the 1910s and 20s.
I know.
It
right?
was weird back then. You're like, well, things haven't changed that much, have they?
And you can see the movie they wrote. The movie they made is online somewhere. Like, they made a silent film starring the daughter and like the mother.
Oh, that's so cool.
Funded some of it. He produced it. So like, again, these people they were just trying to get rich, but they were pioneers. It wasn't like they were just trying to like whatever.
Anytime necromancy comes into the equation, I am just like, that just always catches me because it's just like, and David Koresh, he had that. He denied that he was actually involved with it, but I mean, they were trying to bring dead people back to life.
I will say that was the most. Again, Koresh is another really beat up topic that I was surprised by when I got into it because I thought I knew all about it. I've interviewed like William Gizecki, who won a Oscar for his documentary about Waco like 10 years ago. I didn't, and again,
was that the Terms of Engagement?
No, it was it just left my mind. I'll have to think about it and get back to you. But his name's William Gizecki, is the director. But again, I thought I knew the story. Like, it was a breach of power by the U.S. government. It was like ridiculous to watch like whatever U.S. tanks run over a private citizen's building is ridiculous. However, you start digging into Koresh and you're like, oh my gosh, this guy was awful. He wasn't this like, symbol of oppression from government. He was just an awful cult leader. At the end of the day, he did awful, disgusting things, So that one had a help, including the fighting over raising a corpse. That whole chapter of their life that actually is one of the things that made Koresh take over the Branch Davidians. That's kind of what helped him ascend, because it was like a big power struggle of who's going to lead this group, who were like basically Seventh-day Adventists at the end of the day. They were like 7 branches removed from Seventh-day Adventists. But again, somebody,
with cowboy hats and guns.
Yeah, that's right. They were just amassing guns, and this one guy tried to raise a corpse from the community burial ground, and Koresh used that to take over, and then do his thing, and the rest is history. But yeah, no,
he was sleeping with the guy's mom. He was like
everybody. I mean, he was one of those guys where he made the rule where like everybody's celebrating.
No, but I meant the original leader, and she was like 75 or something, yes. And he
was again. Every cult leader seems to have a bit of the grifter in them, where they will do anything for power and money, And again, not to disparage whatever May Autumn romances, what do they call them? This was pretty extreme.
Jeez.
I'm open to pretty much anything these days. Why not?
Yeah, right. And we were talking about Mount Shasta too.
That's right.
You haven't been there, huh?
One day I'll get there. It's on my list. The funny thing about these books I write, these like my big brand is I'm a travel writer. Basically, I'm a travel writer of the strange. For books like these, where they're like surveys of categories, I don't get to travel to everything, but I usually travel during the book to like 30% of everything, and then I just keep traveling to them. So like slowly, I get to 100% on books like after I've already published them. So Mount Shasta I couldn't get to, even though I was writing about it, but I will get there one day for sure.
Well, we got a lot of weird shit in Northern California. If you're ever around, give me a ring. We'll go get a cup of coffee and talk about weird stuff.
I'll do that.
Awesome.
So what was the coolest place that you traveled to for this book?
So the cult book, I'm going to go back to the Koresh and Unity. So they were in Estero, Florida. And today, all of their buildings are still standing. Like the theater that they did all the performances in, the dormitoriums, the dormitory, the houses, and it's a public park. It's a state park, so you can just go. It's beautiful. I mean, if you consider Florida beautiful, it's beautiful, like palm trees and water and stuff. And you can just wander around. And it's still dedicated to the cult. It's not like they've whitewashed the cult out of it. They have exhibitions showing, like, there's a big globe showing what a hollow earth in their conception looks like. There are pictures from when they were there. There's a grave of the last member of the cult buried right there on the grounds. So it is super cool. And again, with cults, there's less for me to see. Like, most of my books, I try to like angle it so there are physical things I can see. Cults are less so. But I got to go to there. I've been to the Jonestown mass grave in California, in Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
That's just across the bridge. That's a important one. Although I went there a long time ago, so they've updated it since then. It's like an actual monument now. When I went, it was just a single small gravestone, is all it was. So those are the kinds of places I got to go for cult following.
You do any Manson stuff? Go to see.
No, I get to LA about twice a year, and every single time, like, this is the time I'm going to see the Manson sites. Although I have seen who was the woman who died that her name just left me?
Sharon Tate.
Sharon Tate. I've been to her grave, so I've been to Sharon Tate's grave.
Oh, interesting.
She's like 3 rows away from I forgot every name. Dracula. She's 3 rows away from Lugosi. Bela Lugosi. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Joey Ramone. Not Joey, but Johnny Ramone is buried there, I believe. Big statue of him playing guitar.
Oh yeah, in Hollywood Forever. That's where he is, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen it.
Nice.
But yeah, so my next book. So, like, if you want to talk next books, I've been working like a bunch at a time, right? So my next book comes out isn't nonfiction. It's a children's horror novel called Welcome to the Ghost Show. That's in August. My next nonfiction comes out in January. That's called Don't Go There, and it's continuing this series of like cursed objects, cryptids, cult following, where I look at places across the globe that have more than their average share of mystery, right? So the classic one is the Bermuda Triangle, right? The Japanese suicide forest, the Bridgewater Triangle. I try not to put too many triangles in there, but just places across the world that aren't like individual buildings or like that have so many mysteries, like just accumulated on top of them, that they become like super, super interesting to like unravel their stories. So that's my next one. And I'm working on one right now that I can't bring it off camera. I can tell you, but it's I haven't announced it yet. But the Don't Go There is my next nonfiction. It comes out in January.
A lot of murders,
a lot of disappearances. So they wouldn't let me do. So I wanted to do like serial killer highways, right? There's all these highways across the world where, like, over the decades, people have disappeared, right? Or bodies have been found, and they're like, can you not get too dark with this one? We just in cults. Can you? But I still was able to slip in a lot of like murders, of course, because that's, again, part of these places. Not even a lore, and also like what pulls you away from them is death and disappearances. There's like Bridgewater Triangle is a good example. There's been murders there. There's been Bigfoot there. There's been UFOs there. There's like every category of weird in this small little section of southern Massachusetts. So that's another book. I think I'm at 40% of visiting those sites. There's a few out in China and Japan I couldn't get to yet.
We'll have to bring you back on to talk about that one when it comes out.
Yeah. No. There's lots of crimes in there.
I feel like we should do, every one of his, but we should have had him on when we did the Poe series, because he's got a book called Poe
I know.
Land.
We did big Poe series.
Oh, yeah, Poe's one of my core pieces.
Let's check this out. I got a.
Oh, it's awesome, man. I love it. Yeah, no, I have no tats, but I have like Poe everywhere. Like that year I did Poe Land was life-changing, honestly.
I just, I haven't even showed Matt yet. I just mounted a giant taxidermied raven in my living room.
Nice.
That's the dream. That's the dream.
It's pretty awesome.
Have you got your bust of Palace yet to put it on?
Yeah. No, but that's got to happen next. Yeah.
Nice.
And then really quick, will you come? So, and please, just because I'm curious, for the children's horror novel too, do you have events set up on your website already? Will you be announcing any events?
I will be, yeah. So I haven't announced anything yet, but it's whatever. You know the deal. Spooky season's coming, so in a second now I'll be getting. I am going to Spooktastic in Framingham, Massachusetts.
Oh, good. I'll see you there.
Are you there? Okay, I'll be there again. That's where we met the first time. That's right.
Yeah.
So I will be there, but other than that, I haven't accepted any invitations yet. But
okay, sweet. Well, I'll have to get a copy of your children's book for my daughter. And then I can't wait to get the new one in January. And yeah, by September, I won't have my new book yet, but I'll have galleys of it, so maybe I can have an extra one available. But yeah, this is awesome. So thanks so much for coming and talking cults with us. You've inspired us to do, I think we're going to, Matt, right? That's the plan, is we're going to do a whole series on some different cults.
I was thinking about it. Yeah, let's do it. Sounds great. What kind of information can I get on Blackburn Cult? Is there a book or anything? Or
I didn't do a book for that one. That one was newspapers, and let me look at my bibliography. I'll see if I pulled out if anything was like particularly helpful. I'll send that to you.
Cool.
Sweet.
Thank you so much.
That's a good one. But yeah, I assume you're gonna do Anthill Kids. I just want to hear you say all the crimes on your podcast.
I gotta buy the damn book, man. You want to sell me your copy for cheap?
I should. I should.
You can't get it from the library? From any library near you?
You might be able to, but it'll take some time to find. But it's a very rare book. Like Matthew's saying, it's
$250.
Does California have a interlibrary loaning situation because I feel like I live in Rhode Island, which is obviously the smallest state, and I can get my library in Westerly will get any book that is in the entire state. Come on, California.
They do. Yeah, they can do that. When I lived out in the middle of the woods, I relied on the library a lot for books, and I would go there and they would bring me whatever book I wanted.
Okay.
This little teeny tiny library. It was just a room.
Sweet.
Yeah, I've gotten bad at that because I always end up with a shelf of books, and again, it's a bad habit. It's expensive for no reason. But I have Poe. When I did my Poe book, I had to buy the collected letters of Edgar Allan Poe. Took a giant financial hit for that, but now it's just sitting on my shelf, I guess. But I have a row of Poe books and a row of cryptid books and a row of every single nonfiction book I've done. There's a row of books. Cult was again different because there's so much news stuff, in the moment news articles that was extremely helpful for those.
Do you want to tell our listeners where they can find you on social media, elsewhere?
Basically, it's impossible not to find me on the internet. I'm way too much there. So just Google JW Oker and you'll discover me somewhere doing something weird.
Fabulous.
Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the book is Cult Following, the extreme sects that capture our imaginations and take over our lives. JW Oker, thank you so much for coming on. It was such a pleasure, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, I look forward to having you on for the next book.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. You guys know your stuff. It was a lot of fun.
Yay.